Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Lemming, author of literary and horror fiction, and I'm happy to be here today with Mike Sahno, who is a fellow author and the president and founder of Sahno Publishing. So, if you're familiar with me, you know that I've done author interviews before, and I've got a blog and all that good stuff. But one thing I haven't done before is I haven't done video interviews. So I wanted to start with Mike because I've known Mike online anyway for several years, and I've read one of his books, and just wanted to I just looked forward to the opportunity to interview him live, and he was gracious enough to accept. So I'm going to do an interview with him, and he's going to talk about his writing, his mutual interest in literary fiction as well. We both have that interest. And then, hopefully this will be of interest to you, and you'll learn more about him, more about his writing. And so we'll just kind of see how it goes. So, Mike, like I said a few seconds ago before we got started, I'll just say a couple of words about you. And, for the viewers and listeners who are out there. So Mike is, he's the author of three novels and one collection of short stories. And we're going to talk a little bit about his, his work in progress. And he's also the president of Sahno Publishing, which is a publishing outfit that works with, other authors of literary fiction and entrepreneurs. And, he just offers a variety of services, which I'll let him speak about. And Mike, you're in Tampa, Florida, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Well, so let's get started. Before we do talk about, your fiction, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your marketing history and Sahno Publishing?
Thanks, Jay. Well, I appreciate you having me on for this. This is great. I started out my career, you and I have talked about this offline a little bit before. I actually went to school up in Binghamton, New York. That's one of the connections we had, was that we both went to SUNY Binghamton back before it became Binghamton University. And got that master's degree in English Lit after getting a bachelor's in English Lit in a little school down in Virginia. And what happened for me was I didn't end up taking the academic path that I thought I was going to take. It was the early 90s, and the country was in a recession, and I was applying for teaching assistantships, and I would get a letter of, a rejection letter, as it were, back from a college or a university, and it would say, "Thank you for your submission. For your application. Unfortunately, there were 364 other highly qualified applicants." What it was they were basically looking at the PhD people, not the MA people. Right. So I quickly realized that was not going to be the way to go for me. And I already had a job in a market research firm, doing political polls and market research surveys and that kind of thing. And they, for whatever reason, the supervisor was let go. And I don't know if they planned to ask me to replace her, or if they got rid of her and then looked around and went, "Oh crap, we gotta get somebody else to take over for her." But they asked me. And so it expanded from a part-time to a full-time gig. And I stayed with that for 4 years as a director of this. Back then it was called Watts Telecenter International, which that's not the company name either. That's like the department.
Wow.
It was a phone bank. It was like a boiler room with people making calls. But it was a gig, and it taught me a lot about marketing, and especially about the research side of things. And so I stuck with that until I came down to Tampa. And I came down to Tampa to escape from the cold weather that you're probably enjoying up there now. And you're in what, D.C., Maryland?
Maryland, just outside of the D.C. line.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was pretty close to D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't come down here with a job. I came down here to escape from that weather, and I figured I'll get a job here. And it wasn't as easy to get what I thought I was going to get here. And what happened was I had to choose between either taking on a job just like the one I'd had up north as a market research manager, or the temp job that I already had where I was working to get income in a mortgage company. And as it turned out, if you weighed the two out together, they were pretty equal when it came to the benefits and all of that. I think the mortgage company one had bennies and the other one didn't. So long story long, I went ahead and took the mortgage company job because it was just a better deal and it was kind of easier. And the reason I'm telling that story is because that enabled me to spend free time writing, just like my old gig at the market research company did. So I would work and then I would go home and I would work on books. I don't know if that answered the question. That was a long answer to a short question.
No, that's okay. I mean, if you think about a lot of writers and a lot of authors, many, not so many, are necessarily blessed to be able to write full time. I mean, some are, your brand names that you'll find in the Barnes and Noble catalogs. But, I would imagine that most authors, and, in particular, maybe most authors that readers will get to know through, videos like this, are those that continue to work in one form or another, and they have really interesting career paths, and yet the writing stays with them. The love of the writing stays with them.
Sure. And when I was in high school, I went to Catholic high school, and I had a nun English teacher who was so old that she had taught my mom, and I told her she was having us read Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury, and all this kind of stuff. Like, you would never think a nun would have us read the stuff that she had us read. And I remember telling her that I wanted to be a writer, and she said, "Well, you better learn to dig ditches." And I didn't really know if I should take that as an insult or, but now looking back, I know what she meant, because so many people do something that's not writing related or academia, and they're working on their books at the same time. So,
yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. I think if you go I don't know if I want to say this, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway. But, if you get too far into, your passion for writing, and this is not necessarily a good life lesson for young aspiring writers, but, if you get too far into it, sometimes, you want to make sure that you still have enough of a connection to, earn a paycheck and, to just have applicable skills, if you will. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said this necessarily. I would have been young and passionate and full of, fury, look homeward angel type, just full of fury. Oh, I have to write and that's it. But, real life intervenes sometimes. Okay. So, you know what, though? This is a great segue to really ask a little bit more about your writing accomplishments, because, you have a website. I think it's msahno.com, right? MSAHNO.com.
Yep.
And for, viewers who go to your website, they're going to find your 3 novels that are featured there, one of which I've already read, My Brother's Hand, and Jana.
Yeah, there's Brother's Hand and Jana and Miles of Files.
Miles of Files, right. So you've written these 3 novels. Congratulations. I mean, some people think writing 1 novel is an accomplishment in life, and you've written 3. And I want to ask you about a little bit later, I want to ask about your current work in progress, which is another novel. But, can you tell us about the 3 novels that you wrote? When did you write them? Was it back to back? Were you just inspired and, suddenly you found yourself with 3 novels, or was it a longer, more complicated story?
Wow. Well, Brother's Hand was something that I started right out of grad school, probably within the first year or so. And just to backtrack a tiny bit, the master's program in Harper College, Binghamton University, at that time, that creative writing master's course, the original thesis could be one of three things: collection of original poetry, collection of short stories, or a novel.
Mhm.
And I had a few short stories in hand, but they weren't really, there wasn't enough for a thesis, and I didn't feel confident enough to be trying to create a collection out of that stuff. But I'd been known as a poet already. I was class poet in my high school, and I was still writing a lot of poetry. And I had a great academic advisor who actually, I had a class with her as well, and she was somebody who I knew her for her poetry and vice versa. So she and I actually talked about me doing a collection of original poetry for my thesis, and I did. And thank God they accepted it, and I got the degree. It was incredibly nerve-wracking to be handing over a 36-page document, and it's basically pass-fail, right? I mean, either they accept it or they reject it, and lucky for me, they accepted it. But of course, I did write fiction, and I wanted to write a novel, but I literally was not sure whether I could do it. And I think that's probably true for just about anybody who has never written a novel but wants to write a novel. So I started writing this story, and as I was writing it, it was getting a little bit longer and then a little bit longer, and I realized, hey, this could be a novel. And then the question is, can I write a novel? Because you don't know you can do it until you do it. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I always liken writing a novel, a serious novel, I always compare it to climbing Mount Everest by yourself with a spoon for equipment. Like, you don't have a team necessarily. I mean, maybe people do now, and they do beta readers and all this stuff, but I did all this stuff completely by myself.
Mm-hmm.
This is pre-internet. I didn't go to the library and try to meet other writers. It was just me in a room day after day, and I would add it to parts of my journal. I literally hand wrote the whole thing and interspersed with journal entries. Where my journal was interspersed with parts of the novel,
You know what's funny about what you said, though, is, I mean, I think you're right, because writing is such a solitary activity. I think, since you were talking about this being pre-internet, now that the internet has been around and it's become kind of a regular force, I think writers as a group are more likely to flock to it to find their community, because otherwise, I mean, everyone does, but I think when you're in a solitary activity like writing, you just need that community and you go right to it when it's available.
Yeah, I mean, it may depend on how social you are. Like, I can do this one-on-one stuff that we're doing right now all day.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have to be in a group of people, I quickly tire.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter whether it's online or not. I'm like, okay, I'm out. I got to hunker down and regroup by myself to get my energy. But yeah, it's a different world now. I mean, this is early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, the Brother's Hand is a story, just briefly. It's about a guy who loses his hand in a tragic fall and then falls even harder for his physical therapist.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little cute blurb version. And of course, having read it, there's a lot more to it than that. It's in a small town, small community, and there are a lot of other stories of other people, and they all kind of know each other, or they have some direct connections to other characters in it. So there are multiple plots weaving their way through. It's funny, as I was putting this thing together, in those days I was very much in that literary fiction mindset, having read all sorts of classics, and I really kind of put it together in such a way that I was using a model similar to a pretty obscure book by a guy who was, I think, a big influence on Faulkner, Winesburg, Ohio, by Sherwood Anderson,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, I don't even remember reading the thing. I know I did because I had that in mind. It was small town, people kind of loosely connected, and a lot of drama. And it's interesting because just about 4 or 5 years before that, I went into a movie theater with some other people one day, and I saw this film called Blue Velvet. directed by David Lynch, which really shows you a lot of the sort of dark underbelly of a small town, which
Right.
on the surface looks really, like 1950s. Everybody's smiling and waving, and it's very suburban. Uh, but there's some dark stuff going on underneath, and that feeling probably had a little bit of an influence as well. A lot of things influenced it, in addition to other writing, movies and rock music and all that kind of stuff. So when I finished that book, I was starting to send it out to people, and of course I had to write it, and then I had to type it up on a typewriter.
What's that? I don't know what that is.
Right, yeah. It was this electric thing you plug into the wall. It had keys just like a computer. Yeah, you know what it was.
You should just refer people to the movie Misery with Kathy Bates and James Caan, and then they'll know what a typewriter
That
is.
thing she hit him with? Yeah. Well, the funny part is that I literally rewrote that novel 3 times in an editing process, because first I handwrote it, then I typed it up on a typewriter, and then by then computers were starting to come into play, and people were actually owning personal computers.
Mm-hmm.
By now we're up to 93, 94, right around there. It's still pretty rare, and I'm sure the program was word perfect or whatever, but that's what people used. So I actually typed it again, putting it onto a floppy disk. Again, we'll have to refer the young folks to ask your parents, what that is. And so I was sending it out to people eventually once I had a printable copy that I could make photocopies of. And I started working on the second novel, Jana. I actually was pronouncing it Jana until I found out that name is actually pronounced Jana.
Oh gosh! All right, I should have asked beforehand. I know someone named Jana, which is why I say it.
No,
but
and that's how it's spelled. So I actually say it wrong. I'm sure it's an alternate, less popular pronunciation of the same name, but I don't know. But it's better to say it Jana, because that's the common one. And the thing with that novel that's really pretty bizarre is that Brother's Hand was written in the third person, and then I wrote Jana first person. So at that point, really up until today, that's the only novel out of the 3 that I've written that's in the first person singular. So here's this character talking to you, and she's a lesbian who is not really out, because back then it was still kind of, you're taking a big risk, and you could really have problems from that. And she, even though she's not vocally out, it's pretty evident to some people that that's probably what she is, because the way she dresses and comports herself. And so she gets fired from her job working in a daycare center because of this.
Wow.
And you're not supposed to fire people for that, at least as far as I'm concerned. And so then she goes through this battle of, do I fight this? I mean, like, what are you going to get out of fighting it? You're going to get your old job back? I mean, you don't want that job back. Right. So she kind of goes back and forth with that. And then she ends up it turns into kind of a road novel in a way, because she just kind of punts. She just decides, she's early 20s and still not sure what she wants to be when she grows up. And she just takes off across the country and goes all over the place with her partner. That takes up a pretty decent section of the book. So depending on how I kind of wanted that book to be a book that you don't have to sit there and anxiously stay up all night. Like you can't put it down. I wanted it to be a book that people can sort of luxuriate in and take their time reading. And it is by far the longest of the 3 books. And for that reason, and probably for the reason I mentioned, that it doesn't have that page turner element. It's the least successful of the 3, unfortunately. But I mean, one of them has to be the least successful.
Right. Sure.
There's a lot in it that I really like. It's kind of, they're all my babies, but I would like more people to dig into that, because some people have read it and loved it.
Hmm.
And in fact, I have a friend who I went to high school with who's gay, and she was reading it and she laughed out loud while reading it on a plane. That's money to me. I mean, when
Right.
she told me that, that probably made my whole week. So, it is what it is. Um, and then the third one, I was actually, now by now I was sending these out. Now I had two of them, and I was sending them out and getting all the rejections. And then I started working on Miles of Files, and I took a lot longer with that just because I set it aside for a while.
Hmm.
And then that's a whole other story, which we may or may not have time for. And then eventually I put them all out. So I just did them all myself because self-publishing became respectable finally.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, absolutely. And it is becoming more so every day that goes by. And we're both members of oh gosh, the Alliance of Independent Authors.
Yes, sir.
Is a London-based group, but has members throughout the world. Um, my sense has been over the last couple of years that the United Kingdom and maybe Australia to some extent, they're really kind of leading the charge and trying to push for the respectability of independently published authors, even though, they're everywhere. I mean, you and I were both in the United States on the East Coast. So it's just really
Yeah.
great that that organization exists.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
it's going to grow. I mean, I have a sense now that more than ever, I have a strong sense that the reason that a major publisher will not take on a project like mine and represent it and pay any sort of advance is it has nothing to do with the quality. They just don't think that they can make enough money off
sure,
it.
sure.
That's it. It's really that simple. So once I came to terms with that, I went, oh, okay, well, guess what? I'll do it myself, and then I don't have to give all that money that is being made to them.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that creates a great opportunity for readers who don't have to feel like they're going to be pigeonholed and spoon-fed, safely published novels. That, there's a greater diversity and greater amount of risk-taking that independent authors can bring to the market, which, is really welcome. So, well,
Well,
that's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no. I was just going to say, to wrap up, that's a really great overview of the three novels that you've written. I think that being an author myself, it's you're able to look back. At least I do, and look at my own writing, and almost analyze it as a third party objective individual. Like you take off your writer's hat when the writing is done and you put on your critic's hat and you look at this body of work, like I might look at my novel and my short stories and say, okay, well, I see these connections almost as though I'm not even the one who's written it. So, my follow-up question for you is going to be, are there themes that are, that make their way through all three novels? Like, are there consistencies in themes or style or tone? And if you do recognize that, was it a surprise when you found it out, or did you think, doesn't surprise me, this is who I am as a person, this is naturally what I would write about? Or did you find that there was some surprise, that your imagination really, pulled an unexpected turn here and there in terms of feeding you elements of the stories that you ended up writing?
That's a great question. I think some people probably have more of a sense of that than I do. And you did actually ask, three different things: theme, style, and tone. I would say that for me, the style is probably the most consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I think. As someone going back and editing and editing and editing and then editing my editor after I get editing changes sent to me, I do feel like I have something of a style that's unique. One of the greatest compliments I ever got on that really was from my old academic advisor, Liz Rosenberg, who wrote a blurb for Brother's Hand that's on the back cover of the paperback version. It says something like, Mike Sahno writes with blood and guts, with passion, humor, and a radiant energy all his own, or something like that. And that radiant energy all his own is what really stuck with me, because I feel like when I'm really in it, when I'm really in that zone, and it's almost like automatic writing, where I don't even know what's coming next. I'm just doing the thing. Um, there's some real magic that happens. I don't have any kind of logical scientific explanation for what happens there. And I feel like all of the reading that I did in the past helped prepare me to be able to do that, but I don't sit there and consciously make decisions like, oh, I'm gonna create a Faulknerian stream of consciousness section here, or I'm gonna make this read like Joan Didion there. There's none of that. It's all really organic, and it's very, very character driven. So I don't. I saw a thing recently online that made me a little crazy. It was the question of, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, plotter sounds great, doesn't it? That sounds like a job title. Like, you should be proud of yourself if you're a plotter, because you're planning.
Mm-hmm.
And pantser, I mean, not only is it about, oh yeah, you're flying by the seat of your pants, but pantser really sounds like somebody who runs up to people and pulls their pants down. I mean, it's like the worst word I've ever seen in a literary context.
It's pretty bad.
That's more where I am. I'm not somebody who laboriously sits down there with a plot outline that I'm hemmed in by, because I would feel hemmed in by that. So I do have a rough outline of a few things, but it doesn't necessarily mean I know how it's going to end. There might be some big blank spots in the middle. I leave it open, because I have to be open to what's going to happen when I sit down and start actually doing the work.
Yeah. It's funny, because I think a lot of authors, maybe most authors, are like that too. There seems to be an organic flow to creation. But I'll never forget an interview I once read with the novelist Barbara Kingsolver, where she was asked, not using those terms, and by the way, I also can't stand the word pantser. I think it's ridiculous. But, she was asked, whether she plots. And I guess she was kind of a standout, because she is very much a plotter. And she one of the sentences that was most memorable for me is, my characters do, I think she was talking about the Poisonwood Bible and, her novel about living in Congo. And, she said, my characters do exactly what I want them to do. And that shocked me, because, my characters show up on the page. You mentioned Faulkner before. Faulkner once famously said, I don't create characters. I just let them go, and I take notes and follow them where they go, which I think is perfect, and that's someone who gives into the organic flow of creation. And that's the complete opposite of what Barbara Kingsolver was saying, which is they do exactly what I say they're going to do. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, but what's funny about that is that if you really think about it, who else is making them do things?
Yeah.
So even though I feel the way Faulkner did, I mean, not putting myself in the same category, but I feel that same thing, that I let them loose. All I'm doing is sitting there dutifully writing down what they're doing, but I'm the one doing it. So I guess on some other level, they're doing exactly what I want them to do, because whether I consciously or unconsciously know it, that's what I want them to do, I guess. I mean, it's a pretty weird thing. I mean, if you're talking to a non-writer about it, they think you're a little nuts, because you're talking about your imaginary friends.
Well, yeah, but you could always go the Homer route and start out. Let's say the first sentence of your next novel can be, "Oh Muse, sing through me and tell the story of," and you've just absolved yourself of any kind of authorial responsibility. You could say, "It's the Muse. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. It's the Muse."
Right.
you know?
Yeah, Bodhi had a quote about that, about how, writers are not responsible for what their characters say or do, or something like that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a conundrum, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it really is. All right. Well, no, this is great. So talk about, you've mentioned it as we've been communicating online. We communicate via email, and I know you're very active in Twitter. You're like a rock star on Twitter. You've got like 10 million followers, and I've got 3. So, but you've mentioned, your current work in progress, and I think you took a little bit of a break, but maybe you come back to it. I'd love to hear this, but so this novel that you're working on, is it called Whizzers? Is that correct?
It's either going to be called Whizzers or The Whizzers. It just occurred to me that it might be better to put the article in front of it.
Okay.
I haven't committed to that yet. I'm a ways away from having that dialed in at this point.
Okay. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about it? Like when the idea for the story first germinated, when you started writing it, and where you are right now. And I know some writers don't like talking about their stories, so if you'd rather not, that's perfectly fine. We don't have to go there.
Well, no, it's funny because I am working on it, and I spent a little time working on it today. I'll tell you a little bit. The reason I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on that is
Yeah.
because it's very autobiographical in some.
Okay.
And I had a conversation with a close relative of mine about it not too long ago. I think that was a conversation. I've talked to a couple people about it a little. And when I was having the experience of talking about it, the more I talked about it, the worse I felt. And it wasn't like a conscious decision. It was, oh, this is weird. Why do I feel bad about this? And I thought, okay, maybe I'm supposed to kind of keep some of it close to the vest. But I've actually published a few little excerpts from it on the blog, and I've been trying to enroll people on social media, because I'm going to be looking for a cover designer and interior designer and all that. But what's interesting to me about it is that I had written the first couple novels, and I started writing Miles of Files. And there was a period of time where I set Miles of Files aside on and off. And sometimes I would just get frustrated, and then I would just start something else, not knowing if it's going to be a short story or a novel or what have you. And then that wouldn't go anywhere. I just wouldn't know what to do with it. And then I start something else too. So I've got several projects that are in an embryonic stage at best. And for a long time, the Whizzers project was one of those. And I started it all the way back in 2001 or 2000, maybe, right around there. But I only had maybe 15, 20, 30 pages at the most. That was it. And I took it to a group. I actually founded a writers group in Tampa. And there were people who would show up for it. It was small. And I would take poems, or I would take sections of things. And then I took this intro to this novel. And at the beginning of the time that I founded the writers group, there's a woman who was not involved in it. And she later on became involved. And she became involved around the time that the group was kind of on its way out. It ended up dissolving. But in that time, the last few months or year or so when she was around, that was the time that I brought the intro of Whizzers to the group. And it was the kind of group where people were kind of friends, and they would say, oh, this is great, I like this. But you wouldn't get criticism. You wouldn't get the red pen like an editor. So it was nice, but it wasn't helpful, because everybody was just trying to be nice to each other and be encouraging. Well, then this woman came along, and she was already an editor. And so she would mark stuff up. And she even marked a couple, or 2 or 3 things on the Whizzers segment that I submitted. But she absolutely loved it. And she said, this is amazing. I love this. This is going to be an incredible piece. And I hung on to that forever. I mean, it meant a lot to me, because she went on to, she created a company where she was not only working as an editor, but also got into the book business on the level of interacting with people, where she's going all around the country and doing the breakout novel type workshops. And now she's a literary agent.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. But anyway, I set the thing aside for such a long time because I had so much more done on Miles of Files, and I really wanted to complete that. And I know I didn't really say too much about that book, but that's kind of the Tampa book. And it's about a guy who finds out that his boss is stealing from the company retirement plan. And so he has this dilemma of, do I say something about it? And then if I do, what if I lose my job? And then he loses his job anyway. And then it's kind of like, well, okay, I should still say something, but how invested am I? Because I don't work there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I set aside Whizzers for quite a while because, quite honestly, Miles of Files, I was about 75% through with that book, and I got stuck. And it wasn't writer's block. It was, I just got stuck around a plot point. And the plot point, you might find this of interest just because you're a fellow writer. The plot point, I thought it could go either one way or another way, and that was it. And I couldn't determine which was the right way. And I would literally re-edit the whole novel, hoping it would be like watching a movie. And when I got to that point, it would just keep playing.
Right.
It wouldn't happen. And I was stuck there for several years.
Wow.
But I was working full-time as a writer anyway, doing articles and all this other stuff. So I finally realized that there might be a third way that I hadn't thought of, and I didn't know if it would be satisfactory to have that be the resolution of this major plot point. But I just did it. I just kind of bashed my way through the scenes around it and then put that in there and then finished it off, and then that was it. And nobody's ever complained about it. Nobody's ever said, gee, I was disappointed, or how come you didn't go this way or that way?
Right.
It had an inevitability to it that I couldn't see for literally several years. I couldn't even tell you how many.
Right.
That didn't really answer much of the question about Whizzers, though, huh?
No, it's okay. It's all right. I mean, the topic of writing can be a bit, I don't know if nebulous is the right word, but you've got a lot of writing projects, and, maybe one is creating some challenges and you have an idea for something else. It's easy for, the stories to kind of blend together or to think about them at the same time. And, like I'm working on a novel now, but one of the characters is from another novel that I've already published. And so that novel's always in my head. So if you were to ask me about the one I'm writing, I would inevitably just start talking about the one that's already published. So it's all good. So.
Well, I will say that the Whizzers project it's very different for me for a couple of reasons. One is that it is, like I said, very much has an autobiographical element. I mean, it's told from the first person,
mm-hmm.
but it's told by a fictional version of me, not some other person.
Right.
And it incorporates quite a number of elements that are directly autobiographical. So it's intense. And the other element to me that's kind of interesting and challenging is that it is not something that I'm not really sure how to categorize it, which is what I've talked about the most when I've blogged about it. I actually wrote a blog post, I think, called Leaving the Literary Fiction Category Behind or something with a question mark, because it has sort of a paranormal or supernatural kind of spiritual element to it. And I don't even know, as a fellow writer, that when it comes down to it, you've got to create categories and subcategories that are going to impact directly how things show up on Amazon and who's going to search and find this book based on certain keywords and all that. And I'm still not sure how that's going to go. I haven't gotten to that point yet where I even know what to do with it. But it's not just general fiction. It's not just regular folks like you and me going through life challenges and all of that. There's some time travel aspect. There's all kinds of stuff. It's
wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I'm gonna have to find an articulate way to speak about it at some point, but
no, that's fine. Life always happens, but if you could, imagine an ideal time in the future when absolutely nothing interferes or interrupts or distracts from the writing process, what are you looking at in terms of publication timeline? When can readers expect to see the Whizzers, on bookshelves, whether it's print or digital bookshelves?
well, it's funny, like you said, life does have a way of sometimes interfering. I did a thing, I knew I was going to work on that as the next project because it is really closer to my heart than anything I've done before as a novel. And so this past New Year's, I saw people posting, tweeting stuff online, New Year's resolutions type stuff, and it was hashtag something 6 words. I forget what it was, but it was basically like making a commitment to get something done. And so I said, okay, I'm going to make a New Year's resolution to finish Whizzers in 2018. And that was in January. And then in February, my mother, who's in her 80s and was living back in Connecticut at the time, took a fall
Oh,
and was on the floor for 5 days.
what?
Now, if you told me that if I fell and was on the floor for 5 days that I would survive, I would say, nah, come on, I'd be dead after that, wouldn't I? Much less somebody who's in their 80s. Not only did she survive the fall, but after a couple days in the hospital, she came around back to herself again, and she's okay. But she needs to be in assisted living, so she's now down here in Florida, and so I'm durable power of attorney, and I've got that whole thing going now, which is like taking on another full-time job in addition to running my business. So it explains why the dark circles are darker than normal.
Yeah.
But so I forgot all about the fact that I had committed to finishing the book this year. But I did tell myself and tell others, I'm going to publish Whizzers in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good thing because I don't think it's going to be completely finished by the end of next month. But I'm getting there. I've got some real progress on it. I'm over page 100 at this point. And I because I don't plot everything out exactly directly, I have some questions. I have some questions about how this thing is going to end up looking. Just, the final original draft. It's not a first draft because much of it has been written and rewritten and, or edited a lot. And that's just part of my process. I just can't resist. But yeah, it's going to be 2019. And I know it would be better if I could say it's going to be September, but at this point, I'm not even ready to put the firm date on it just because I'd rather announce it when I know that, okay, it's done.
Right.
Or at least I've written it up to the end, and now I can rewrite it multiple times and all that. It took me 7 years plus for each of the other ones, and I'm getting this one done faster.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the original beginning of it was started many years ago, but the work, I've done a lot of it this year, like probably 65, 70 pages worth of it has all been done this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had to set it down and pick it up, back and forth. And I haven't plotted it out 100% either. So, but I know how it ends, which is terrific. Good. I have the end written, which is unusual for me. So, just got to move the ball down the field. So.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is really great. Really appreciate your getting, deep into the background of each of these stories and, talking about your progression as a writer and as, someone who's lived life. And I'm very sorry to hear about your mother. I know you touched on it briefly, having to put down your book. You've touched on it very briefly, but that's too bad. I'm glad she's well. I'm glad she's close to you and has that support. That's very important. It's more important than writing, just looking after people. So, Mike, just to wrap up, how can viewers and how can readers find you online if they're interested in staying in touch? What is your website? I think I might have mentioned it, but what is your URL? And again, Twitter, you're very active on. How can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, the URL for the website, you had that correct. It's msahno.com. So it's M as in Michael and then SAHNO.com. And then on Twitter, it's at Mike Sahno. And I think most of the other, pretty much if you just Google my last name, SAHNO, you'll find all my stuff on the first couple, 3 pages of Google. You'll get, website, all social media stuff. And I mention that because there are people who are going to follow this who are readers, who are potential people who might want to read one or more of these books, and hopefully they'll pick up yours, mine, etc., and other people who you're promoting, which you're doing a terrific job on cross promotion with other authors. So
Thank you.
Kudos to you for that. But there may also be some people who see this just because I'm blasting it out on LinkedIn or on my Facebook business page, my Sahno publishing page. And so some of those people are potentially people who would be looking to have me do some work for them. Because my full-time gig that I do running my own company, typically I ghostwrite for small business owners and entrepreneurs who are looking to expand their authority, reach, and influence. And so if somebody needs a book written for them, that's something that is my area of specialization now. And in between those big projects and of course my own work, my own personal writing, I also do smaller stuff for people, whether it's blog posts, social media, whatever it is, any kind of writing project that's not of a highly technical nature.
Great. All right, Mike. Well, thank you so much for joining us once more. I'm sure our viewers and readers will have a great time hearing you talk about your your writing, and we'll look forward to, like I do, the publication of the Whizzers. And for those of you who are listening or watching, thanks so much for your time today. I'll be returning shortly with the second video. And Mike is the first. I've known Mike online for years. Glad to finally have a chance to speak with him here today. So, continue to stay in touch and enjoy, and hope everyone has a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Jay.